And is everyone having a great time so far? Let's see. Yeah. Come on. Yes, this is a great event. So again, thank you for coming out today to the 7th Annual Amazon Web Services Public Sector Summit. We're very excited. We have a really great panel today to speak about the Department of Defense Security, Governance, and Compliance. This is a track that we hold every year to talk to the defense community and share the stories from our customers and listen to some of the security best practices that we have available to our customers today. So today we have a fantastic panel of cloud computing catalysts in the defense space. This session is geared to learn how DoD customers today are adopting AWS utility cloud-based services from the perspective of the mission owner, our independent assessor, and worldwide public sector manager, Amazon Web Services. As we all know, that public sector's requirements can be very rigorous, especially in the defense community. Such compliance regimes such as the Department of Defense security, cloud computing security guidance requirements has made some recent changes, and we're going to be talking about that today. There's also a lot of things going out with the Federal Risk Authorization Management Program, FedRAMP. We had an earlier session on FedRAMP Accelerated, and how does that work with the DoD SRG? So we're going to be talking about those topics today with our panelists, and also hearing best practices, lessons learned on how you can use AWS for your mission programs, and if you're a partner, how do you work with the defense community? And what are some of the challenges that you're going through that perhaps you'll learn how to move past those challenges and work closely with Amazon Web Services to addressing them. So before we start, I'd like to provide an introduction of our guest panelists. To my right here, we have Mark Fox. Mark Fox is Amazon Web Services Worldwide Public Sector Manager who works directly with our defense community. Mark has been instrumental in enabling our defense customers in using Amazon Web Services and is a graduate from the U.S. Naval Academy. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. And next to Mark, we have Lieutenant Colonel retired Bob Torch, and he prefers for me to call him Bob. Bob is the Total Ammunition Management Information Systems, known as TAMIS, project manager for the Munitions Divisions G3, 5, and 7, headquarters at the U.S. Department of Army. He holds a master's degree in the management from the Florida Institute of Technology and is a Level 3 certified acquisition professional. Thank you, Bob, for joining us today. And then next to Bob, we have Michael Carter, the Vice President of Veris Group, and is responsible for Veris' group's FedRAMP and FISMA Assessment and Advisory Consortium, as well as their Cybersecurity, Automation and Modernization, and Adaptive Threat Division service lines. As part of his role, he serves as the technical project lead for many of the FedRAMP engagements, including being the first FedRAMP agency-approved cloud service provider, Amazon Web Services. Michael holds a number of professional certifications and holds a bachelor's in business administration and computer information systems from James Madison University. Thank you all for joining us today. So, Bob, a lot of people are going to be asking, what is TAMIS, and what does it do, and why is it so important to your program?
Well, TAMIS is the Army's munitions management capability. It develops Army ammunition requirements. It prioritizes the requirements. It allows units and organizations to manage those authorizations that are given them. It provides for the forecasting of ammunition and across the whole spectrum of munitions management, the missiles, mortars, small caliber munitions, everything that a force would need. And so it also includes the test munition. So it's not just wartime munition or training munition. It also includes things we do in the test community, foreign ammunition, and most importantly, it allows soldiers to be able to request their ammunition. And so soldiers request their ammunition online, digitally signing their request form, and then sending it through their their chain of command for approval. So you have a requester, an approver, and a validator. And they sign off on it with their electronic CAC signature, and it gets routed to an ammunition supply point. And that ammunition supply point receives it, brings it into the warehouse system, and they generate the request for issue to the soldier as he shows up to pick up the ammunition. The other key aspect of it is it does forecasting. So we connect to the industrial base by sending what future requirements are back to the industrial base, so they can then ship them to the locations where they're needed and at the time that they're needed.
Wow. So I know you're an early adopter of moving to the cloud, especially cloud computing technologies in the defense space. How were you able to navigate culturally to Amazon Web Services?
Brute force. Everything in the DoD, and if you're in this room, you know that it's a very big challenge to convince people and organizations that they've got to move forward. Well, fortunately, we had a senior executive in the Army G3 who's since moved over to another organization who saw that, and he inspired, directed, commanded, encouraged us to participate in a cloud migration pilot project. And so we were one of the systems that was included in a DISA G6 CIO pilot project, and we we used that as the authority to move forward. Interestingly, it was at the time that the contract vehicle, we were recompeting the TAMIS contract. And it was at that time, we were just fortunate enough to be able to write the contract language into the contract that required cloud migration. And so we got that in there. The contract was awarded to Hewlett-Packard, and they were the ones responsible for the migration of the site to Amazon.
Great. So what type of research did you do, as people look to the cloud? What do you recommend for the research that you've done when you came to Amazon Web Services?
Well, at the time that we were looking at this was 2014, and many in the community know that Amazon was the only one that had a PA at the time, a provisional authorization that enabled to meet our requirements. So there was only one choice for us. But what we did do is we compared cost. We worked with MITRE and a couple of other organizations as part of this integrated process team, and we costed out what it would cost to go to DISA MilCloud, what it would cost at Altest, what it would cost another provider, Army-owned, and what it would cost to go to Amazon. And when we racked and stacked all the dollars and cents, it was clear that Amazon's costs were much lower than MilCloud. They were much lower than any other service provider could offer. And so that's how we ended up over at Amazon. But mostly it was because Amazon was the only game in town. I mean, and it's worked out very well for us.
Great. So Michael, there's been there's been a paradigm shift in the security assessment process, especially within the DoD community. They went from the cloud security model, and now it's the DoD Cloud Computing Security Requirements Guide. A lot of folks kind of are trying to understand, what is actually being accepted from the Federal Risk Authorization Management Program in the new SRG. Can you tell me what are the biggest misconceptions within the DoD space about SRG?
Sure. So there's basically, when you look at FedRAM's right now at a FedRAM moderate or low level, they're looking at high. There is some reciprocity being worked out between FedRAM moderate working out to a DISA impact level 2, and then FedRAM High would be DISA impact level 4, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But when you go into the DoD compliance realm, you're talking a lot more time, a lot more just level of effort. So FedRAMP at a moderate level is 325 controls. When you go into level 4, you're adding an additional 35. Go level 5, you add 9 more. But those 35 controls are not light controls. We're not talking a policy document you got to build. You're getting into even more automation. You're getting into some of the more DoD-specific requirements that even NIST doesn't even select in any of their low, moderate, high baselines. So I think just the level of effort to go through all that, plus the time. When you go into a FedRAMP and you get a FedRAMP ATO, You then have to kind of start to clock with the DISA reviewers, because they're going to independently review your package for the security requirements guide. And that requires them to have a resource available to actually look at it. They're going to then ask questions of you. You're going to have to get your 3PO to come in and basically back up what they tested. Then that ultimately gets pitched to the DSOG group for the provisional authorization that Bob was talking about earlier. So I would say just time and level of effort. I mean, FedRAMP itself is a large undertaking. Just to get into the DoD space above that, I'm not saying it's the same as FedRAMP undertaking, but there is additional steps you have to do to go down that path.
So you mentioned level 4, level 5, and level 6.
Yep.
You know, what are the differences, and what does AWS already meet under the SRG?
Sure. So level 2 is basically uncontrolled non-class information. Level 4 is controlled unclassed information. And level 5 is as well the same thing. But level 5 allows you to hold national security systems within the boundary. So right now, AWS has a level 4 authorization for GovCloud. We're working on one for East-West. We've tested it, now kind of going through approvals. And then we're also approaching the level 5 realm for GovCloud as well.
Right, and how has the transition from the NIST special publication, you know, the risk management framework, so DoD had their DICAP, and now they're going through RMF. You know, that risk management framework, how does it help provide that assurance and governance around the security of the cloud when you're talking to the DoD space?
Sure. So the risk management framework, it's all based on NIST controls, more so from the civilian side, unless you've been doing the DIA RMF transitions on the DoD side. But it is giving that baseline set of requirements. When you're talking to DoD community, they're used to seeing their equipment, they're used to granting their own authorizations. They have to establish that level of trust with a provider like AWS. So having this independent third-party assessment come in, I mean, we dig deep into all of our assessments. We take the NIST RMF framework and basically we add a pen test, we add credential scans to everything. We do code reviews where applicable. You are getting a more thorough assessment and ultimately your assessment reports where you can make that determination at that authorization stage of the RMF framework.
Great. So this is for all of the panelists. We all understand SRG as a guidance, but can you share some best practices in making risk-based decision? So Bob, from a mission owner perspective, how did you do that? You know, because I mean, it's accepting RPA, but then you also have to accept it for your program. So what was the best practices and approaches that you used to making that risk-based decision?
Well, I think that it's always important to be able to score in looking at the analytics of it, or looking at a way to quantify the level of risk you're going to accept as a system owner. So one of the features that one of the requirements that I imposed contractually on our contractor was to conduct static code analysis, was to conduct dynamic analysis to make sure that my application itself was secure, and was secure with some kind of rating. So we needed to be able to rate the level of risk. And so by using the scoring mechanisms in these software code tools, we're able to draw some kind of inference into how secure we are. I think that one of the other sort of best practices, I think, is to understand the SLAs. Understand if it's a challenge to look at the AWS SLA, because we're just a small system owner, and their SLA is almost non-negotiable. But we look at that, and it's very strong, and I think it's important that system owners understand the level, the SLA, the service level agreement that you're accepting by moving and by migrating to Amazon.
Great, that's fantastic. And Michael, from a third-party perspective, what does it mean to make a risk-based decision from an agency authorizing official?
Sure. So our job, again, we're the independent third parties. So we go in and basically test all the security controls that are in there, conduct those scans. We are going to then tabulate all those results into our security assessment report. Then from there, you can dissect the report and figure out, is it a false positive? Is it an operational requirement, which is basically a risk-based decision in the FedRAMP space? And then from there, we can work with AWS to identify those mitigating factors. You know, where is that finding in the infrastructure? How many devices have that that actual failure, like it is a certain plugin from Nessus fails, well, how many devices in the entire inventory? So we have that ability once we go in and conduct the scans, we know exactly how many hosts were actually included in that scan set and can come up with those mitigating factors to then put in front of someone like Bob or his authorizing official to say, based on the, however many findings we have, these are the ones we feel have enough mitigating factors to maybe downgrade it, to give you that kind of ability to grant an authorization, but then also put them into what we call an operational requirement, which is where you're going to accept the risk and kind of continue on to grant your authorization, or PA in the DoD community.
Another thing, Michael, is one of the key documents that I know from FedRAMP and also for the DoD SRG is the Security Assessment Report, and you provide briefings both to the Joint Authorization Board and to the DSOG. What are some key components in the Security Assessment Report that are valuable for the mission owner as they leverage that from our third-party assessment report?
Sure. So like Jim mentioned, right now AWS has their ATO. Their initial ATO was through HHS, so we do HHS briefs on an annual basis. On the DoD side, we just recently did the DSOG brief for their GovCloud package. So you're basically getting in a room of anywhere between 20 to 50 people when you're presenting the package, the findings that were there, what's operational required, which is mentioned, to allow them that insight into how the security posture of the system really is. And then from there, we might pull up part of the SAR. I know when we do some of the HHS briefs, we'll actually dissect the SAR. So there's multiple tables in the SAR. There's the findings table, there's the false positive sections that you can outline the justifications for why something is a false positive. In the case for how we test, we'll go actually get evidence for the justification for the false positives. Also with the operational requirements, we do the same thing. There's a summary table in there for priorities and remediation. All of that gets basically translated from our SAR into the POEM that Jen's team will then put together for the government agency. But the goal is the SAR is supposed to be that one-stop shop. This is the summary. There's an executive summary section. It breaks down a number of findings at each level, high, moderate, low. It then breaks it down even further to a number of high, moderate, lows in each type of test. So you got the pen test, you got the scans, each type of scan, web, database, OS. If there's a source code review, all that gets tabulated into that SAR, so that authorizing official has everything in front of them to make that determination if they're going to accept that risk and with the whole package and grant an authorization.
So I know that I hear some customers that will say, well, what kind of rigor does your third-party assessor do? I mean, they do work with you, they do assess your program, but how do we have that independency, if you will? So can you kind of describe how you guys are certified and what is your threshold to recommend AWS for an ATO?
Sure. So I'll talk about our relationship first with AWS. So we kind of have a little love-hate relationship. You like us in the planning stage. During it can be grueling. So, but then when we wrap up and we go to brief, we're going to brief it as a collective unit. They're going to brief their SSP, all the documentation that they have, their POEM, if they write the POEM, and we brief the assessment report. But we all have to be on the same page, or else the authorization official has no idea what exactly, like who's right, are they right, are we right? So we've been doing this for 4 years now with Jen and her team. I was involved in the initial authorization under HHS, and when you get to those meetings, you do have to come as a collective unit. My team, I subdivide my team out, so I have, like Jen said in the bio description, so I run the AWS 3PO assessment every year, and then I have sub-teams under me. I have a scan team, I have a pen test team, and I have a control assessment team. And within that, we will then dissect each aspect of the actual FedRAMP assessment. And it all gets correlated back up into a report, and then that's what's ultimately presented. And when we come to presentations, it's normally me, it's normally my lead tester from each group. I'll bring my pen test lead, and that's how we show the collective unit together. But we dive deep. It's one of those things, like my team, I'll talk to my pen testers, they get excited to test AWS. Not gonna lie, I don't find anything that often, but it is fun for them to test big name clients. So they kind of like raise their hand immediately when they find out they had AWS on the docket. Same with my team as well on the control assessment side. Just kind of going out, seeing the culture. When you deal with, a lot of people that do FedRAMP assessments came from the old FSMA government CNA background. You deal with some government agencies and you ask them how many POEMs they have, and they might say 1,000. They might have, 500 highs. when you're dealing in the FedRAMP space, I mean, it's basically zero highs. Like you're not going to have anything. So they're very serious in how they take security. And you get some cool technologies for AWS. If they don't have something implemented to meet a control, they will build it. You're not dealing with a COTS product they're buying. They literally build the tool. So it's kind of fun to go experience that and kind of dig into it. That's why my team likes to kind of come out every year and do this. And it's kind of an ongoing thing now. We don't really ever end with AWS. Kind of always test.
Great. So I really like the perspective here of where Bob's, you shared best practices of, how you came to AWS, looking at it from a mission owner, changing your contract language, and then adding on these key initiatives such as SLAs are important to consider that, leveraging a cloud provider like AWS that has a provisional authorization. So we talked about the acquisition part, we talked about SLAs, we talked about the security authorization, Michael talking about the whole security assessment report and that whole process. Another topic that comes a lot within the DoD community is the cloud access point, CAP. Everyone's smiling up here. I hope it's good. So Bob, what is the function of the cloud access point, and how does the CAP fit into the DoD secure cloud computing architecture? Everyone is talking about that.
I'll speak for this just a little bit. The cloud access point is, it sort of serves as a conduit to protect the DoD, the DoD network, from outside forces. So it has the break and inspect features within there to do the security. But it's required for system owners that are impact level 4 to connect through the CAP. What also is in there is the internet access point, and it basically has the whole security stack that is keeping me from infecting the DoD. Me sitting at Amazon probably, well, very, very secure, that's for sure. But it's been a challenge to work through the connection process. It's very tedious. There's been many meetings. We're still not connected. We're close. We're discussing the CND requirements now, and we're implementing the CND. But it is extremely challenging and again, we're in the pilot phase, okay? So from a system owner perspective, we've moved our application owner over to Amazon, but we're not connected to the CAP. And so while we have the architecture that we're going to use for production, that's all tuned and ready to go, it's optimized, load balanced and all ready to go, all geared up, but we're not using production data. So we're not using real Army data that we're maintaining still in the Pentagon. So once that connection to the CAP occurs and we get our IATT, our initial authorization to test, then we will begin testing the connectivity to the CAP. But quite simply, what it is it just simply protects the DoD, and it serves as a conduit for system owners to connect to the DoD.
Thank you. So Mark, I know you work with many customers on this. Can you describe the onboarding process for connecting to the CAP, especially with our Amazon customers?
Yeah, so there's a few things, and some of it gets into best practice for the customers that are out there, and there's a few familiar faces in the room that have been through the process in various phases and fits and starts at times. First thing is have the SRG out in front of you. Read through it. You're not going to get through it in one sitting. It's a multiple thing, multiple evenings that will put you to sleep, but you need to get through to get your arms around the SRG. There's other documentation that's out there on the DISA security portal. So the IASE.disa.mil, that's the security portal. There's a cloud section that's in there, and there's plenty of documentation, not to include the SRG, old versions, new versions, online versions, downloadable versions, but other best practice guides as to how to get to the commercial cloud. And to Bob's point, if you're level 4 and above, you're going to have to leverage the CAP. The other thing you can do that I'll kind of go back to the best practices piece of it is don't just go, I'm a DoD mission owner and I want to get to cloud provider A and kind of start down that path. It needs to be a multi-pronged approach. There's a lot of education that needs to happen up front to even understand what the CAP is and how it operates. Depending upon the CSP that you're utilizing, what is the methodology that has been used to connect the CSP. So from an Amazon perspective, it leverages a handful of our services. So how do you, to Bob's point, how do you extend the DoD, how do you connect the DoD to a cloud provider? For us, it's a service that's referred to as Direct Connect. And from there, you then get into the way that your virtual private cloud, your VPC, needs to be architected and configured and how it connects to it. So there's a lot of things that will happen. The other piece that's, again, a bit of a foot stomp is don't pull in your authorizing official, your CNDSP, these other prerequisites are ultimately going to have to approve it. Don't pull them in at the last minute. The earlier, the better that you can engage with them. And in most cases now, again, if this is a primary .mil audience, the people who are in that approval chain, it won't be the first time they've heard it. And the more that they can hear it, the more that they can see it, the more that they can get comfortable with what Verus does, what AWS does, understanding that shared security responsibility model, which, oh, by the way, is not the same every single time. So depending upon which Amazon services you're using, that line of demarcation of what we are going to take care of for you that are in some of the controls, that the Verus folks understand what controls are shared controls, and then which controls completely belong to the end customer, the better off you're going to be. And it's not identical every single time. So it is a journey to get through that process. Again, one of the first things that's going to happen is a BCA. Again, you talked about getting through that process. That in and of itself is not a short, easy process. You've got to compare your cloud provider or providers to MilCloud that's out there. And what's interesting, I'll give you just sort of a simple metric that's in there. Just for storage, for example, in MilCloud, it's 54 cents a gigabyte to store something that would be equivalent to object storage in AWS that typically costs around 3 cents. And at first, people will get a little bit infatuated with that and go, wow, Amazon is more than a tenth less expensive than the other. But the reality is there are other things that you have to do. There are things that are included in that 54 cents a gig number that are not necessarily just included in that core 3 cents from Amazon. So we were talking in the back before, if you have an architecture and you're operating it in the cloud, there are other shared security services, we refer to them often, it's HBSS, ACAS, things like this, that still have to be done. So that 3 cents model, or whatever the cost is, it looks like it may be a 10-to-1 ratio, it is going to go up. It's not going to go up to where it's very close, but it is going to go up. So you need to look at those things up front in the BCA as well. And then the connection parts of it, the ports and protocols piece of it, what are you ultimately connecting in the cloud to the DoD? That process requires, there's an ITT component to that. There is the CNDSP, of which I think the terminology is changing from computer network defense to cyber defense protector. I get my acronyms confused. And that is so important, and it's one of the biggest challenges for you folks out there today to have a CNDSP Tier 2 provider that says, I'm in, I am the one that will monitor that connection for TAMIS, as an example, to the cloud. Without that, the CAP, the security tools that are there to protect the DoD, there's no one listening, watching, and being able to react to them. So again, reach out early and often, and in fact, there's a separate event that's happening here in town right now with some of my counterparts with a handful of the C&D providers, just because of that. The more they know and understand, the better off you guys as mission customers are going to be to get to that final
And
ATO.
the burden is on the system owner. So the burden for the getting or obtaining that security service is on the system owner. Nobody's going to go out there and hand that to you. So that's something that the system owners, as part of the migration process, have to be engaged in.
The other piece to close that out, and we've had some of the MilDeps have started to go down the path, the Navy has done it, where how do you deal with incident response in the cloud? That's ultimately going to have to be part of what goes into your ATO package. I know that Mr. Miller, the AO for the Navy side, would not sign off on an Amazon specific, what essentially would have been in old days, because they're doing the transition from DICAP to RMF, which is a DICAP MAC 2 sensitive ATO for AWS, without going through the tabletop exercises of incident response. So either do it yourself, reach out to those folks, look and leverage at what they've done. That is inheritable information that could be copied and potentially improved upon as well.
Those are great points. You talk about, I think one being in the security assurance realm, I think it's very important from the get-go is to bring the security team in early. Look at the architecture understand the SRG, and talk about how we're going to make this happen. Because if we know that the target is this, then we can come up with an effective solution. It's bringing all of the right key stakeholders in the beginning. So those are great points, Mark. Thank you.
They can end up becoming your biggest supporter once they get through sort of this education process, where at first they're going to be very standoffish. That's their nature in general. I'm sure some of you out there are from the compliance, security, IA side of the house. Over time, they end up becoming the biggest proponents.
Absolutely. So Mark, who owns the CAP architecture?
So today, the CAP architecture, there is one CAP architecture that DISA has. So the DISA has stood up their CAP. Without getting too deep into it, essentially DISA looked at it as a mandate, an unfunded mandate that came about from the CSM, eventually made it into the SRG, that a CAP has to exist for 4 and above. DISA didn't have people or funding to go out and build a CAP. So what they did, they looked out and they said, well, okay, we have the IAPs, which the IAPs perform a very similar function. If you think of the DoD as a ring and an internet access point connects out to the World Wide Web, it's there to protect the DoD from things that happen in the web. So wait a second, the cloud's out in the web, let's do that. The problem is when bad things are happening out in the web at times, DoD will cut off the IAPs. And if a customer like this has an application that is mission critical in varying degrees, doesn't want to be cut off. So that was part of the reason to look at an alternative way as opposed to using IAPs to come up with a CAP. Well, there were these things, and they still exist today, that are called NIPRNet Federated Gateways, or NFGs. There's a couple of them that DoD, DISA has utilized, one out of San Antonio, I think the other's in Ohio, that they are using as the egress point to connect to the cloud providers. So DISA has that set up. They have one, I believe it's been run here to Virginia, where it hits the Amazon network here out in Ashburn area, where we have a large amount of infrastructure, so it's on our network. And then that will backhaul over our network out for level 4 to the GovCloud region, which physically resides out in Oregon. And then they're trying to have a second connection that will come out of Ohio. So that's the CAP that DISA has. There's another CAP that the Navy has stood up. They've essentially said, we have a data center in Charleston. We have the requisite security stack that is at the NFG. It's the same security stack that protects an application, whether it is sitting in the Navy data center in Charleston or whether it is sitting outside of the data center in a commercial cloud provider. So they have the security stack that's necessary for the CAP, and then they have gone and, just like DISA, acquired commercial connectivity from Charleston. Again, that gets up to Ashburn. They're also looking at alternative sites, either in the Northern California area. At one point in time, there was some talk about connecting to Kansas City for McKeats for the Navy Marine Corps folks out here, but I believe that stayed to an East Coast, West Coast model. So there are 2 existing CAPs today, one through DISA, one through Navy. I would say, and I'm looking at my counterparts here that work with Army, Navy, Air Force, and others, that every one of the services are contemplating, should I, could I, what would be required for me to stand up my own CAP, whether it's a large program or PEO, because the cost for the individual CAP itself are essentially the infrastructure itself, if you're going to get physical security appliances, and then the connectivity from a handful of providers that have been approved to go ahead and do that. It's not a significant cost, and as you put more applications in the cloud, that cost is getting shared across the board. But there's a lot of pressure to have more CAPs, to have the CAPs that exist today to be enterprise ready, to have the bandwidth to handle multiple TAMIS and much larger applications than that. And it's still one of the few remaining big rocks, big hurdles that's out there for DoD, is to get the CAP enterprise ready.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. So Mark, we also get quite a bit of questions regarding physical and logical separation in the defense community. How would you advise the customer how to achieve that in DoD?
So it kind of goes to what we were talking about here on the 3PO side with Veris. You have your impact levels 2. Again, think of things that are public. ISE.disa.mil. All of us here can log in right now on our phones or laptops or iPads and hit ISE.disa.mil. That's a level 2 system. Level 4 systems are going to be like Bob has. There's sensitive information in there. There's CUI information. There's some, pick your acronym, reason that data is not publicly available and accessible. So that's generally going to be 4. And if you think of 2, 4, 5, and 6 across the board, there is generally a bell curve out there of how much is out there, with the peak of that bell curve around level 4 applications. Fewer level 5s, if you have one, you know it. And then level 6 on the secret side is a different animal. But the difference between 4 and 5 is a higher degree in those 9 additional controls of physical separation that's required. So at level 4, and again, the guys in here know me, know I want to draw a picture of a server that has got n number of virtual machines that are on it. And Bob's Army application might be a virtual machine on there. Netflix might be on there. Amazon might be on there. Pinterest might be on there. Pick whoever. Could be on that same physical infrastructure. For level 5, that is not allowed. Level 5 says it has to be federal customers, not state and local, not EDU, not anybody else. And the way I sort of describe it is it's .mils and .govs have to be on there. So how do we at AWS allow and recommend customers to get the degree of physical separation required to get to level 5? This will be part of the discussions that we're having right now with DISA that will ultimately go up to the DSOG. Think of the world in the cloud as broken into 2 primary areas, compute and storage generally. So on the storage side, and anything that is in motion or at rest, we say this regardless of the level, whether it's 2 or 4 or anything else, encrypt, encrypt, encrypt. Do it even when you're not mandated to do it. And speaking to the .mil audience here, if you will, you control the keys. There are ways that you can use encryption that Amazon provides, and that might be sufficient at some point down the road, but for today, where people's level of acceptance is, control your own keys. So anything stored is encrypted, which essentially means that it might have started as level 4 or 5 or 6, but if it's encrypted, and NSA has backed this up, that data is ciphertext and essentially can be treated as level 2. That's the storage component of it. On the compute side, when you turn on an Amazon server, EC2, for the folks in the room that know that, one of the checkbox options that you have is to get dedicated tenancy. So back to that server, think of it as a floor in the hotel room here, and you don't know who your neighbors are, and it could be anybody that's running in that Amazon region. When you go to the level 5 recommendations, you will check off a dedicated instance or a dedicated host, which has some software implications that were good for you. You own that entire server. There is no one else on the floor of your hotel, if you will. You do pay a premium for that. It's not significant. It's a one-time price for the entire region, whether you're running 1 or 1,000 servers, and you pay about a 10% premium on the hourly rate. So if it's a 50 cents an hour server, the server might go to 55 cents an hour, and you're going to pay a couple dollars more per hour for the entire region to do that. So a combination of physical separation at the compute layer, and it's actually a higher degree of separation than you would normally get, where it's okay to be Army, Navy, Air Force, DHS, whoever. When you do dedicated instancing on that server, it's just Tamus and his account. It's not even anybody else in the Army. So it's a significant degree of physical separation and then encryption on the other side of it. So those 2 components we believe would give us the mechanism to get to a level 5 and potentially even higher in some areas.
That sounds great. And also another thing that comes up a lot is data spillage. How have other DoD customers addressed data spillage that you've worked with?
Yes, I think it goes back to the previous comment, which is look at what you do today. Take your current plan as to how do you deal with data spillage. And typically, there's this fun process that we go through. And we kind of laugh at ourselves and the folks that are the forensics people that deal with data spillage, where a lot of what they do today is that, I'll call it somewhat of a legacy model, where they want to come into the data center, they want to get that piece of hardware, physically isolated, ultimately probably take it out and take it back to a forensics lab. And getting them over the hump of realizing that you're not coming into the data center. I've been here 5.5 years, and some of you have heard of, I've never been in an Amazon data center. I have no reason or right to go into Bob's data center or anybody else. That's a security risk. The ways that people do forensics in the cloud are actually more ways similar to what they do today, shy of the physical aspect of pulling that server back into the lab with them. That was part of the previous comment that the Navy had gone through. They had to go through the process of bringing all the constituents together who were impacted and affected and have a role when an incident occurs via spillage. And they said, okay, let's tabletop it. The incident just occurred, whether it was a classified document was put in here or whatever may have happened, and it was a lot of, do I call Bob? Do I call Jim? What do we do first? So they had to march through that process in the cloud. We have responsibilities. The customers have responsibilities. At the end of the day, what they have found out, generally speaking, is that they can do more from a forensics incident response standpoint a little bit differently than the ability to what they had to do in the traditional way where it's an on-premise model. So they can get through it. It's not something that anyone should be scared or worried about. It's a little bit different. And at the end of it, people coming out of that are going, okay, I actually can do more than what I had done before But again, I'm going to be able to stay home in some ways and do this remotely and not have to go into the data center.
So we talked about 3 critical areas right now. We talked about CAP, we talked about data spillage, we talked about authorizations, and also physical and logical separation. What are some services that are available to customers, our DoD customers, to help them navigate through these best practices, Mark?
So that's a long laundry list. Probably should have had that one sitting here in front of me. The services that are going to support that go everything from the simplest, which is I've got to do my BCA, so I've got to figure out a cost model. So for those of you that have gone through and used the AWS simple monthly calculator, right? What is this thing going to cost me? And we joke it's called the simple monthly calculator. It's only simple after you've done it about 6 or 7 times. So and I mean that, right? So those of you that do have to go through there, right? And Bob, you guys probably have. Lean on myself, my peers that have done it day in and day out. We will go to you and make sure, did you remember to put the ACAS server in there? Did you put those things in there? And I know, by the way, it only has to be a very small micro server at times, and it's only going to cost you 5 cents an hour, but make sure you have it in there. So that's an easy best practice. The other one gets into specific security services that AWS has, whether it's turning on CloudTrails or other services like that. And I'm going to reemphasize the word services, because it actually makes our life very tough. Amazon calls everything that's in the portfolio when you go into the console a service. EC2 is a service, S3 is a service, CloudTrails is a service. I didn't realize that the reason we call them services is it has some tax implications, which you call your products. But many of these things that are called services are in fact really product features or enhancements. Many of them don't have cost implications to them. You enable them, you turn them on. So if you're going to do CloudTrails and get the logs of everything that happens in the cloud, everything's an API call, we don't charge you to turn it on. We are going to ask you, where do you want to send the logs? We're going to say, put them in S3. Now, you put them in S3, we're going to hold them, and we're going to charge you 3 cents a gig, whatever it may be, but still very low cost to do that. One of the problems that we have is that many of these things that are security services that have potentially positive implications on your security posture are not within the boundary of what has been pre-approved. So part of me wants to say you can't use them, which is a bad thing. But the reality of it is, and again, I wish there were some AOs that were in here, and we do talk to them about this, is even though a service is not within the boundary of what Veris has looked at and ultimately gone through the DSOG and is an accredited, it's on that piece of paper, the boundary says EC2, EBS, S3, et cetera. It doesn't mean you can't use it. It means that you're going to have a discussion early and often with your authorizing official to say, hey, there's this other new security service that Amazon has, and if I turn this thing on, I'm going to be able to increase my security posture. There isn't anything to inherit to put into your ATO package. So that AO and the team are going to have to look at it a little bit deeper. And we're working with DISA. They are open to looking at a given service to say, is it really a service, as in their term, a CSO, a cloud service offering, which means it must go through the sausage grinder, or is it really a feature or enhancement? And as long as they understand it and that's what it is, they may be able to put that in the boundaries. So I don't know if you've got some comments on some of those specifically that have come up.
Yeah, so in our authorization package, we did US, East, West, and GovCloud. Each of them have the 5 core services, EC2, EBS, VPC, IAM, and S3. That's in both of them. We've recently tested, Redshift is also in US, East, West. So that's part of the boundary. So we're testing Redshift and GovCloud now. We are rolling out testing for Glacier, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, CloudFormation, SNS, SWF, SQS, Kinesis, and then we did test and document it's in a package and offer approval, DynamoDB, EMR, Redshift, the MySQL and Oracle, and sorry, in the first batch, the other RDS is part of the other one. What is it?
RDS, not Redshift.
RDS, sorry, my bad. Too many acronyms to try to remember.
Yeah,
So hopefully by the end of the year, all these stuff will be rolled in. It kind of has to go through the various approvals, but you can tell your own AOs that all those are in the process of being assessed by us. It's going to be a busy summer for my team, but that's okay. We'll get through it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I think the point there is many of those services he rattled off, they are true CSOs. Yeah. The RDS, those are services that need to go through the full assessment. But some of the other ones that are on the security side that are really more features, and again, we'll continue to kind of work on that one and try to push to say, does it really have to go through there, or can we make it easier for people to enable these things that are security-related services earlier than having to go through the full 3PO process?
Right, and it goes back to the whole risk-based decision that we talked about. So, we're down to a couple of seconds here, but before we go off, I'd like to ask Bob, you talked about, the CAP and that also being like an enterprise service. So what is your plan about common services, and do you plan on using the Army's or planning to use your own?
Well, the Army has a responsibility to provide the common services. They're just not ready to do that yet, but I'm ready to receive them and have been for quite some time. And so we keep pinging them during these IPRs. But NetCom has got the responsibility. They're working on it. They're going to get there. They've got the architectures that they've proposed during the last sessions. But what I've decided to do, and I guess I'll mention it here, is that we've decided to use another organization. And so we will use another organization until such a time the Army can provide that service to us. And so I hope to be able to use this service to be able to connect to the CAP, because the connection authority relies upon having the CND, the network defense pieces in place. And our network defense is kind of robust. I think I've mentioned it to some of the folks in here before about, we're using, in addition to AWS, we've got the Akamai out in front of us as well, and providing the site shield and the web application firewall, and providing other services like our CAC logon feature comes from Akamai. So I think together with those, with our CND that we're going to be provided by another organization, I'm going to bring that to my AO and say, look, we've got the best we can be in order to open us up to be able to use. And we'll see what she says.
Great. Well, I really think we have some really great pointers here, especially talking about our authorization, the whole process, the kind of rigor that our independent assessor does on AWS, so that the DoD mission owner understands the security of AWS, the level of effort that is required, as well as the different types of requirements, such as CAP, also understanding physical and logical separation, and then also understanding your acquisition, and making those risk-based decisions to move forward. You're going to have to get the right key stakeholders in the room so that you know what your target is and everybody understands what you're trying to accomplish. So thank you for coming today and sharing your story and best practices. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. All right, if you have questions for our panelists, they'll be right over here to the left of me, and you can come up and line by line, and they'll be able to speak with you. Thank you.